Hey, I'm Corbin, professional misplacer of things, and in this video I'm making something I should have made a long time ago. I've been in this studio for over a year now, and a lot of my tools are nicely displayed and organized back on that back wall, but there's been a handful of tools that have just kind of been scattered around the workshop and some that have been loosely dangling right above my toes. So I'm making some workbench storage pouches so everything has its own spot and it's easy to find and grab when I need it. This is the first one I made for the right side of my workbench, which holds my cutting and marking tools. And this photorealistic sketch is what I'm making today. It consists of two larger pockets at the bottom, a sheath for my strap, and because why not, I want to add a tiny pocket on the sheath for small pieces of hardware. If you weren't impressed by my drawing skills, here is a digital version of the plans that you can screenshot or just click the link in the description. I'm using some leftover wax canvas for this project because I love working with this stuff and it has a nice rigid structure that you can form around your tools. This project consists of a back panel and a front panel which all the pockets will be sewn to. I used the 4 to 5 ounce veg tan leather for the sheath and I made that by wet forming my strop. I nailed down the general placement of the tools and started folding hems onto each of the pockets. The top of the pockets gets a double hem, which I folded outwards so that there's no lip for the tools to snag as I pull them out. The sides were just folded back a single time. The bottom of those two larger pockets will be hidden by the back panel later, so I left that unhemmed. With the creases in place, I can sew the top parts of the pockets. We recently got a new camera that can track my motion, so I was experimenting with that here. But on that note, if you have any critiques on my camera work, please let me know. I always try to show things as clearly as I can. I squared up the side of the pocket and sewed it into place so I could start forming the pocket around my knives. This is what I call a trapezoid pocket, and I've been making a ton of them recently. It's a very simple pocket to make, but it allows the pocket to have volume. So it's only slightly harder to make than a flat pocket, but functions more like a gusseted pocket. The way it works is as I force the edges to be parallel, the extra fabric in the middle must be folded to form creases, which is what creates the pocket's volume. I placed those creases where my tools will go and clipped everything in place. Once I was satisfied, I sewed the bottom and side in place. I also want seams in between each of the tools to segment the pocket. So with the tools in place, I use a ruler and scratch awl to mark the stitch line. I also marked a small guideline on the larger panel since the pocket can still shift at this point. That little line will help me make sure I sew it in the correct spot. After sewing, I sealed the threads with the thread burner. For mostly aesthetic reasons, I wanted to add rivets to the corners of the pockets. Not only does it hide the beginning of those stitch lines, but it gives me a good excuse to incorporate some leather into the project in the form of washers. So now the strap holder won't be the only piece of leather. I used smaller 7mm rivets at the smaller segments and resisted the urge to add more leather by skipping the washers on these. I got lucky and the second pocket sewed itself, so I started working on the strap sheath. I scored a line 3/4 inches from the edge, which is where the back panel will fold over to. I need to make sure to position it below that line. I sewed on the baby pocket, which was a bit awkward since the leather was already formed. The sides of this pocket are not completely vertical, which means it will lay a bit more flat than the other pockets, but you don't need a ton of depth just to hold a buckle and maybe some rivets. I marked and sewed the leather in place, which means I can start the finishing touches. I scored 3/4 inches from the edge and folded a hem on the short sides of the front and back panels. I then placed them on top of each other with the right sides touching. I secured it with clips and sewed just the bottom side. Then I can fold the back panel back, which creates a nice finished edge at the bottom of the pouch. I continued folding it in that same direction and clipped the sides together. The top needs a larger hem to make room for the snaps that are going to be placed on it. And I realized I needed to trim a 1/2 inch from the fabric, and this change will be reflected on the plans. Then I scored a line 7/8 inches from the edge and folded on that line instead of to that line like I've done previously. I folded it once more to the guideline I made earlier and clipped it in place. Now I can sew around the entire perimeter. Once it's sewn, there are no raw edges to be seen, and all that's left to do is add the snap. I used my other pouch as a reference and placed the snaps 7 inches apart. I installed the buttons and sockets onto the fabric. The stud will be screwed into my wooden workbench. If you don't want to drill into your workbench, we also have adhesive back snad fasteners. Both will be linked in the description. I drilled the studs, snapped the pouch in place, and started loading it up. I put my small hammer and some snaps into the extra pocket, but honestly it might become a phone and keys pocket eventually. My strap slid into its spot nicely, and the baby pocket is big enough to hold a pack of rivets. So now I've got a nice set of tool pouches on either side of me as I work, and I'm pretty sure that's gonna really improve my workflow. If you wanna do something like this for yourself, make sure to use those free plans in the description to get you started. And while you're down there, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and like this video if you got anything of value from it. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.